All right, another question. Reach into the jar, pull one out, and this one says, oh, this is a fun one. Is Bitcoin legal? Well, now we're getting into the realms of law and governance, which is always a murky conversation to say the least, especially with the recording that anyone can see. But the answer for the most part is yes, it is definitely legal. But the question becomes, what's the jurisdiction if you were going to have a legal question? Bitcoin has governance. It is borderless. What jurisdiction would you try someone about a Bitcoin transaction if they're in Singapore or Abu Dhabi or Europe or Asia, anywhere? Where would you take them to court? So yes, it's legal, and it's getting more and more legal every day. Just in the United States alone, there's ETFs now, electronic transfer funds, or tracking funds, that basically is just a conduit for the stock market to buy Bitcoin. There are companies that store Bitcoin on their balance sheets. There are governments and on the state and federal level that will take Bitcoin for payments. And we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve in several states, either in process or under work. And even on the federal level, we have Bitcoin as a reserve level. Actually, the United States government is one of the top 10 holders of Bitcoin, allegedly, if they really have the amount that they say, which is debatable. I mean, we just don't even know what's in Fort Knox, but I digress. But basically, Bitcoin, it's legal. The questions about the legality were about, like, you can't print money, you can't create your own money, so that's where it was questions of counterfeiting. But now that's been deemed and ruled upon that Bitcoin is an asset, not necessarily a currency. Assets are, of course, legal. They fall in the category of gold, silver, precious metals, real estate, collectibles, all that stuff. So those are perfectly fine, and you can exchange Bitcoin for, you can trade asset for asset, like for like. You can, it's more of a barter than it is using it as the currency. So that's, again, it goes back to more of the store of value, holding its value over time. It's more of an asset class and eventually now there are conduits now, and you can ask us about which ones that we're using. You can borrow against your asset too. So imagine if you have a house. Like, a lot of people have a house, they're homeowners. Not everybody anymore, but just say that you have a house that you can borrow against. That's an asset you can leverage to get liquidity out of. You can pull equity out of. Now you have capital to use, and that's not a taxable event. So Bitcoin is an asset. There are now mechanisms to pull liquidity, equity out of your Bitcoin up to a certain percentage and use that as for whatever you want to use it for. So this is why another thing, like Michael Saylor says, and I completely agree, you never want to sell your Bitcoin, you want to borrow against it. So it's legal. There are more and more rulings. There's the Genius Act, there's the Clear Act, the Clarity Act, all these different acts that they're putting out there to define more regulation. Now, some people are wondering if the government's getting too involved. That's a different story, but for the most part, it's about whether it being legal. Yes, it's legal. It's legal tender in many states and certainly many countries. So don't worry about the legality of Bitcoin. All right, great question. We'll move on to the next one.